This video is to show you how to install the JHM solid linkage upgrade for 6-speed Audi transmissions. First, I'm going to go over the tools you need for this install. First off, you're going to need a wrench or a small pair of vice grips like this. Flat blade screwdriver is going to be helpful. A hammer of some sort. 19mm open end wrench or socket would work. Also, if not just a 19mm, a 3/4 inch wrench is the same size as well. You need a 8mm or 5/16 Allen wrench and socket, or you can just use an Allen key. Not as easy to use, obviously. Then we need something to cut the linkage rod a little bit. We can use like an air grinder, a Dremel, or something with a bit, something like that to cut it open. Or we can use a large angle grinder like this. The angle grinder, you have to be a little more careful on what you're cutting, but both ways will work. It just depends on your preference and what you're used to, how you're cutting. We'll go over that in a minute. Here's what's going to come in the JHM kit. You're going to get a modified stock end linkage piece. We take the OEM piece and we modify it. And one thing on the install, you got to remember the biscuit's got to be in there. This is a demo version, so it's not in there, but make sure when you get it that little biscuit's in there. And here is the main piece, the bearing, spacer bushings, the bolt, and the nut. First part of the install is going to involve removal of the stock plastic and rubber socket. There's a couple things we're going to need. We're going to need the pliers, screwdriver, and the hammer. What you need to do is it's going to be hammered down, and we're going to need to go in here and peel this back. Sometimes this helps, the plier, to get in there and peel it back, or the screwdriver if you just kind of strike it in there. You got to get it just enough so this all pops open. Now that I've worked this free, you can get in here and there's like a little washer that holds this in place. You'll see the metal washer. We're going to reuse the metal washer in the boot. So if your boot's damaged, not a big deal with ours. You should be fine. It's metal. If you want a new boot, you'll have to buy a whole new socket assembly. But like I said, most of the time these boots are fine unless somebody damaged them. So now that it's out, what I want to do too is I want to go in here and I'm going to take these vice grips and just kind of make sure it's going to be easy to put it back together. So I'm just going to go in here. You can use a regular pair of pliers, but these small vice grips work real handy for this. And now that it's cleared out, next thing I want to do is I'm going to have to grind on the back side of this. We're going to have to clearance this for the back side of the linkage. And we're only going to want to go, if you see the angle right here, you're only going to go about halfway up this angle, in the center of this angle, right about there we're going to cut it to, because we're going to use that angle to hold the new bearing in place. Now that I've cut this edge piece off, you can see I'm about halfway through this middle piece. Not the straightest cut, it's not a big deal. You just need to get this out of the way to clear our linkage. Once you get this cut out, if there's any burrs that you're concerned with, what you can do is just take a file and clean it out. Now that it's cleaned out and ready, what we're going to do is just clean this off with some brake cleaner to get it clean, because we're going to have to put the bearing in with a little bit of Loctite, and we will provide that. The Loctite that I'm going to use is in a large bottle, but you will get a small little capsule of it to help lock it in there. Now that we got this all apart and cleaned up and ready, we got to actually disassemble the stock ball and everything. You need to get this ball off, and we need to get this boot that was sitting in there, and we need to get this washer out of there that was behind it. What we're going to keep is just the washer and the boot. Discard the rest. And now we're ready to put the bearing into place. And when you put the bearing in, you want to just put a thin layer of Loctite in the outer area. I'm going to supply that little 1 ounce packet. And just put it in there. Make sure, like I said, this is clean dry. Then be real careful. Make sure your hands are clean before you stick the bearing in there. Bearing drops in. And try not to get Loctite in the bearing race. Obviously it's Loctite. It's going to lock it up. And then now we need to get the washer in. Hold this in place. You may need to tap this washer down. It's not always a tight, it's a kind of a tight fit from being hammered in there previously. Get it in there, get it flush. Once it's flush, you just need to peel the edges over. Make sure it's tight. Just like OEM, this is how it's held in with OEM. Sometimes a vise comes in handy for this. You probably only need a couple corners, but I like to get it in there all the way. So I knock in most of the edges. Make sure it's really good. Try not to hit the center. And for back here, sometimes you have to use the screwdriver. You knock it, make sure it's all the way down still. The screwdriver is kind of sharp, it might cut into it a little bit, but that's when you can just get a thicker one. Once that's all in, I'll go over the next step. Now it's time to assemble the back side of the linkage. You see how we ground it away? You need to just do the same and hammer this in a little bit too. Use a vise usually to hold it or something sturdy. But it's okay, it's still bottomed out, but I like to just get this hammered in a little bit as well. Okay, now that we got this in there, we got this front side hit down, back side hit down. It's in there real good. And like I said, you can hammer it all the way down, but it's already overkill, especially with the Loctite. So now we need to get the rest of the way back together. And if you really look at it, you basically now have a full-on Heim joint or spherical rod end setup for your linkage without expensive fabrication costs. Next thing we need to do is we need to assemble all these pieces with the boot. The first part, get this rod ready. There's going to be a long and a short bushing, and they're tapered. The tapered goes toward the bearing to help center the bearing up. So real quickly, you just grab this, drop it in, it's countersunk. Put this long bushing on, taper side out. Take the boot, get it back, usually just get it on this bushing for now, just to kind of hold it in place. I'm going to drop it in like there. I'm going to put the short bushing on the back side, taper side towards the bearing, and then our bolt. 3/4 inch or 19 millimeter will work for that. So the next step is tightening it down and doing grease. So like I said, 19 millimeter or 3/4 inch, and then an 8 millimeter or 5/16 Allen. I prefer the Allen socket. And you'll notice too, it's kind of hard to turn because this bolt is swedged. It has a little swedge in it, so it's self-locking without any plastic or anything like that that'll be susceptible to heat. Feel free to get this really tight. It's going to be fine. It's a 1/2 inch bolt. There we go. Got nice and snug. Now the last step before we put it together is just load this full of some grease. We will supply some synthetic grease. Just load this up, and then you'll snap the boot right over the outside edge. Now we got this full of grease, we load it in here pretty good. Keeps the back side greased up. And then we just need to walk this on. Now it's fully assembled and ready to go back into the car. And if you look, this side's wide open. That's because we want the grease to be able to come through and let it breathe. If we put a boot under here and dirt got inside, it would just be a trap. Normally spherical rod ends are left uncovered, but we like to cover the top with grease. It helps get grease inside, keeps lubed. We've done this on several cars now with several thousand miles and no issues. Just like I said, it's just like a race car Heim joint. We've just done it at lower cost and making it so you can do it yourself without a lot of welding and fabrication.